We've discovered how individual politicians use the secret language of power. But what happens when they get together? A handshake looks like a friendly gesture, but in fact, it's one big tell. Depending on how politicians shake hands, they come across as more or less in control. It's a power game with elaborate and subtle rules. If I were a politician trying to control the handshake, here's what I would try to do.
I'm going to go for the upper handshake.
First, I'd get onto the left-hand side and try to get my hand on top. Then I'd grab the other person's elbow. When the cameras capture the image, I'd be the one who's in control and who quite literally has the upper hand. Maybe that's why the Prime Minister looks so puzzled when I do it to him. The leaders of two superpowers are about to meet in the Grand Hall of the Kremlin. They're here for delicate discussions on each other's nuclear arsenals. But first, there's the crucial matter of the handshake. Who's going to come out on top? Way in advance, Yeltsin raises his hand so that Clinton has no choice but to place his hand underneath. Yeltsin completes his control over the handshake by grasping Clinton's arm. He has Clinton exactly where he wants him. Here the German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder has positioned himself on the left, thereby assuming an advantage over his guests. But he hasn't bargained for President Clinton. Clinton reorients his body towards the photographers. He exposes his right arm and drives Schröder backwards. Clinton is only interested in the cameras. Schröder is completely outmaneuvered, and he knows it. There are two world leaders in this picture, but Clinton makes sure that it's a one-man show.
Mr. President, please.
The very act of touching is itself an important power tell. The most tactile of all modern leaders is President Bush. Touch for him is a way of connecting with people. It's also a way of asserting himself. Touch operates as a status reminder. He is ready for Bush and makes himself look more important. First, Bush gets in his trademark backpat, but Gore is positioned to score the advantage. In the race for the White House, Gore lost out, but on his own home turf, he's determined to win the battle to have the last touch. Such tells, loved by politicians, are also used by those who enjoy the power that comes from fame. Tom Cruise is being welcomed onto the stage at a premiere. He shakes hands with his host, and they both grab each other's arm. When the handshake ends, the host is still holding on to Tom. As he lets go, Tom comes back and pats his host. He's reminding the host that he's more important. For aficionados of tells, such displays create something of a spectator sport. After the familiar photo shoot, convention dictates that the host guides the visitor away from the scene, usually by placing an arm behind the visitor. Allowing someone to go through the door first is widely seen as a gesture of politeness. In fact, it's a doorstep tell, a classic exercise in power that hands control to the host and puts the visitor in a slightly subordinate position. Somehow politicians seem to understand this. That's why they dislike going through the door first. Look at Clinton trying to steer Major through the front door of number 10. When neither party is host, these tussles can really heat up. That's exactly what happened when the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat, and the then Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, were guests of President Clinton. Arafat and Barak represented the opposing sides in the age-old conflict between their peoples. Watch what happens when they try to decide who's going through the door first. At the time, the media regarded this incident as a piece of good-humoured horseplay about who was the more polite, but the media hadn't read the tells. They failed to recognise that Barak and Arafat were engaged in a battle of arms control. Deep down, neither wanted the other to look powerful. They both wanted control. This kind of one-upmanship can take many forms. In 1992, Bill Clinton won the presidential election. On Inauguration Day, he arrives at the White House. The outgoing President Bush and his wife Barbara are there to greet the Clintons. On the surface, the Bushes seem to be the perfect hosts, but if you look more closely, you can see the secret language of competition. Notice how Bush locates himself at the edge of the top step, forcing Clinton to shake hands while he's standing below him. It's Bush's way, quite literally, of keeping Clinton down. Clinton responds by making a fuss of the dog. It's his way of showing where his true admiration lies. Barbara pats Hillary. This is intended to look like a friendly gesture. In reality, Barbara is reminding Hillary that she is still the First Lady. History repeated itself 8 years later on the inauguration of the next president. This time the Clintons welcomed George W. Bush and his wife Laura to the White House. Bill Clinton positions himself strategically on the top step, extending his arm and forcing George Bush to shake hands while he's standing on the step below. Bush can't resist the opportunity to pat Hillary on the elbow, another example of the power touch. But George Bush gives something away. He's clearly overwhelmed by the occasion because when he thinks nobody's looking, he surreptitiously bites the inside of his mouth, his trademark anxiety tell. Now that you've been let in on the secret of doorstep tells, you can use it to create a league table of prime ministers and presidents and spot which country's leader is top dog. Remember, the trick is to be last through the door. On his last visit to London, President Bush didn't behave like a guest. He took control, slipped his hand behind Tony Blair and guided him through his own front door. In this case, it's definitely America 1, Britain 0. Soon after that defeat, France's proud leader Jacques Chirac called on Tony Blair. Watch the doorstep tell. Chirac scores the victory. Once again, Tony looks like a guest on his own red carpet. This time, it's France 1, Britain 0. So what happens when Bush and Chirac, the two world-beating doyens of the doorstep, meet? Can we detect a global pecking order? Who gives way to whom? This time Chirac was playing at home, so he had the advantage. Bush was one of the guests. When they took up their positions, there was no way of knowing who would win. Chirac made the first move, but Bush was quick to counter, getting his arm behind Chirac. Bush had taken control. It was a narrow victory. United States 1, France 0.